Welcome into your Week 12 Fantasy Game Day preview here on the Fantasy Sanctuary Fantasy Game Day preview channel. Hit the subscribe button if you have never done so before. Obviously, you can catch most of our content over on the Fantasy Sanctuary, where we have just finished previewing the entirety of Week 12. But now we're going to talk about Fantasy Game Day specifically, not specifically. God, what have I become? They have absolutely thrown some money at us this week, boosting the prize pots on Thursday night's Cleveland-Pittsburgh game. Make sure you jump into the Ballers contest. But we've also boosted the Sunday Stars £7.50 entry contest, so expecting plenty of entries into that one. That is going to be a good prize pot, and we want to give you the keys to success with it. So let's start with the captain picks. Rich, first player off the board, Devon Achan, 6,800. We know he's been crushing it since Tua came back. How much confidence do you have in him this week going up against the Patriots?
Yeah, huge amounts. I think that you've got to say it's a decent matchup. The Patriots struggle against running backs on the ground. I think they're a larger front seven in terms of size. So a smaller, shiftier back potentially going to struggle there. And it's also just the role. This is a guy who Raheem Mostert's fallen away. Jalen Wright, I don't think he's ready to take on a workload. And he's just getting consistent receiving usage every single week, over 5 targets every game since Tua's been back. They've dropped the price on him this week. He was 7,000 last week. He's down at 6,800 this week. It just feels like it's almost it's too straightforward not to. I'm a little bit worried it might be too chalky, but it's such good value, and it feels like it's almost ridiculous to try and get away from him.
Yeah, and I'm not even worrying about chalk captain choices for the most part. I think that leaning into that projectable amount of volume and the projectable amount of points that you can get from it makes sense. We have to approach certain parts of this roster building like that. And I think obviously if you have a differential at captain, you can rocket up the leaderboard. But I think if you go with a safe pick at captain sometimes and then just choose a stack and a couple of different pieces around that, that can really unlock things. Look at the team that won with MVS in their lineup a couple of weeks ago. Achan, he is playing on a team who are at home, 7-point favorites. That is a good recipe for running backs. We know that the Dolphins are going to focus on him. This is where the game's going. You look at Jalen Waddle's barely a part of this offense now. We've got Tyreek Hill, who's only seen a 22% target share compared with last year when he was above 28% in all but 2 games. And I think that Achan can absolutely thrive against this Patriots defense that's allowed the 10th most running back fantasy points. They rank 25th in DVOA against running backs as pass catchers. So very much in on Achan for the second straight week. Also very much in on Christian McCaffrey, who hasn't really put it together like the CMC of old yet. But obviously he's coming off quite an extended break. He hadn't played since the Super Bowl. Now they go into Green Bay. We know the Niners love playing against Green Bay. The Green Bay defense, it's not particularly one which you have to worry about on any account. They rank 15th against the pass. They rank 18th against the run. Against running backs catching the ball, they rank 17th. So I don't really have any concerns there. Do you think that this is the week where CMC is just running back 1 overall?
I think the volume's there. He's easing work back in. You know, this isn't a small injury that he's missed time for. This is fairly significant, and it's going to take him time. I don't think he's looked bad. I think he just hasn't looked explosive. And that's the thing that's always going to take time to come back. So as long as the volume is still there, I'm still going to keep riding CMC. I think, you know, he's ridiculous. He's so cheap at 6,600. You know, that's like £1,400 cheaper than Saquon Barkley, and you're probably expecting him in a similar kind of points projection world. And it's just mad that you can save that much money to go down to CMC, who last year was basically the highest priced player on the slate every single week.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a player who has 30-point games in his outcomes easily every week. And if it means that you have to drop down at quarterback to be able to afford him, I'm fine with that because his ceiling outcomes are so high. I think that we're probably not going to see CMC played as much as he should be for the reasons you mentioned. And I'm very much into it. And I think this could be a fun one. If there was one player on the Green Bay side who you look to correlate this play with, who would it be?
Put me on the spot there. I would probably say, look, if you're looking for kind of taking a risk upside, maybe you roll with Jaden Reed. I think Christian Watson, Jordan Love pushed the ball downfield more last week than perhaps we've seen in previous weeks. So I'm quite intrigued there in terms of a pure dart throw. But if you want to go maybe double running back, Josh Jacobs has been phenomenal last few weeks. Maybe that's a nice way to approach it. But the other thing I want to mention on Christian McCaffrey before we move on, though, as well, is Brock Purdy's struggling with shoulder soreness. You know, if you're struggling with your shoulder's not as strong as it is, you're probably not going to push the ball downfield as much. What does that mean? You check the ball down to Christian McCaffrey more. Those target volumes we know that he can be fantastic with. And if he's going to get 6-7 targets this game, that's a hell of a lot of points in his back pocket.
Yeah, and I think your point about playing Josh Jacobs and Christian McCaffrey together is a really valid one. Normally, we don't necessarily want to do that, but it's about the running back archetypes. And the way that Christian McCaffrey gets there is so different. Like, you don't want to start David Montgomery and Zamir White or like in the same game together, because so much of it is reliant on ground game, plodding, like accumulating touches. Well, maybe not Montgomery this year, but the archetype of Montgomery over the years is Christian McCaffrey can take any ball to the house. Christian McCaffrey can rack up so many receptions that it doesn't matter if Josh Jacobs is still getting plenty of touches on the other side. So very open to that one. We're going to talk about the stacks of the week, though, and we're going to start with the Eagles. Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Dallas Goedert. Devonta Smith hasn't practiced again today for the second straight day. I believe it's a hamstring injury. AJ Brown has really been struggling over the last few weeks. Dallas Goedert, he got back up to an 88% snap share last week after being down at 63% in his first game back. Obviously, though, with AJ Brown, it's been a little bit thin lately. We've seen Jalen Hurts have 9 rushing touchdowns in his last 5 games. We've seen Saquon Barkley having over 100 rushing yards in the last 4. But AJ Brown's had only one top 30 wide receiver finish in the last 4 games. Do you think that this sets up well against the Rams for him to bounce back and turn it around?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whenever there's one of these infinity stones on this Eagles offense that's missing, I think you consolidate the target share. I think it's a great thing for AJ Brown if Devonta Smith's banged up, not going to play. You know, a hamstring's not a small thing, particularly if he's not practicing. I'm nervous that he's going to be out there at the weekend. I also think that the Eagles are the kind of team that they want to keep AJ Brown happy. If he's not produced in a few weeks, you know that they're going to be forcing him the ball. I also think that this is how you get after this Rams defense. They've got a great front seven. Their pass rush is phenomenal. They last week they were leading the league in pressure rate. I don't know if they still are, but I think that we're going to see AJ Brown get the ball in his hands and try and feast after the catch and hopefully bring that ADOT down a little bit this week and just go to work. And I think that this is a game you could really attack quite heavily. You know, if you're going to go Hurts, AJ Brown, Goddard, you could maybe look at a bring back of Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. I think both of them could be interesting. You could even roll in with a Kyren Williams if you want to go that way. But I think that this is a game I want to attack as many different ways as possible. It's one of the highest over-unders on the slate, and loading up on the Eagles feels like a good way because I'm not convinced this Rams defense is anything special.
Yeah, the Rams defense ranks 22nd in pass defense, DVOA 20th against the run. Meanwhile, the Eagles, since their week 5 bye week, have allowed the fewest receiving yards of any defense. So I think that you could definitely fade the Rams pass catchers entirely, or if you want to lean into the shootout, this does have a high over under at 50.5. Absolutely fine with that. The Lions, every week we seem to talk about the Lions. Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jared Goff. This game against the Colts feels like one that now that Anthony Richardson has shown us a little something, maybe there's just a little more sneaky upside than there had been before. We know that the Lions give up the 8th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They're not an easy team to run on, force teams into the pass, which then should help the overall environment. We saw Jared Goff last week come off his best fantasy performance since week 7. Do you think that Jared Goff has enough ceiling in this game to compete with the dual threats who are on the slate?
I think the way he played last week, the way the Lions offense played last week, I think they've got enough ceiling that they can put up an obscene amount of points against anyone. I have to say, I don't love the value of this kind of stack. I feel like Jared Goff is quite expensive at 5,600. I feel like Gibson St. Brown, you're paying up there at 7,200 for each of them. It's a very expensive stack. If you're going to start trying to add in a bring back in terms of Josh Downs, something like that, it gets very expensive very quickly. But I just feel like anytime the Lions are on the field at the moment, you almost want to have a little bit of that offense in your game day lineup, because it feels like they're going to guarantee to put up a lot of points. Again, it's another high over 50.5.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite hard to fade them. And Amon-Ra St. Brown scored a touchdown in every game since week 2. Jahmyr Gibbs just seems to be getting there in such a strong way at the moment that, yeah, I'd be completely fine with that. Maybe you can pivot down to Montgomery, or maybe you just take Amon-Ra and you target the Anthony Richardson side of this. We were on Anthony Richardson last week, said at Stone Cold Minimum he had to be played, and lo and behold, he was in a bunch of lineups for me that cashed. Now, a guy who is also Stone Cold Minimum, and people might not be as excited to play, Tommy DeVito, Tommy Cutlets himself, ready to make New York great again. Malik Neighbors, 6,000. Wan'Dale Robinson, 3,600. Malik Neighbors has only finished worse than wide receiver 32 once this year, despite all the bad quarterback play that he's had to deal with. I think that we know the Bucs are going to come out and pass plenty. We know that Mike Evans is going to want that 1,000 yards receiving yards on the season if he can get there. This is his first game back. DeVito, when he played last year, 67% completion rate, 7.4 ADOT, did take 6 sacks per game, which is fine for fantasy because it makes him pass more. If you're taking a sack on first down, you're not running the ball on second down. So, Rich, on our weekly preview show on the Fantasy Sanctuary main channel, you talked about how excited you were for Tommy DeVito. Just roll it back for me.
Yeah, exactly that. I dived into every single snap and drop back that he had last year, and I came away pleasantly surprised. I think I remembered him being woeful. He wasn't. Yeah, okay. He's got the most insane ability to take sacks, but actually he got the ball out on time. He delivered an accurate pass, and I think if you stick him in an offense, he's almost a bit like Gardner Minshew, where he's not going to push the ball downfield an incredible amount. He's going to hold on to the ball at times and infuriate you. But anything underneath, he gets accurate, he gets the ball out, and he lets his playmakers go and play after the catch. And we know Wan'Dale Robinson's going to have a low ADOT, but could potentially get force-fed volume. We know Malik Neighbors is absolutely phenomenal with the ball in his hand. Okay, he's not hit the last few weeks since the concussion, but he's so underperforming his volume right now. I just feel like if you're looking for a cheap stack, you can pencil in Tommy DeVito, Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, and it gives you so much value to go elsewhere. You can load up the roster with a bunch of other studs, and what's not to love?
Yeah, and we talked last week about Anthony Richardson at Stone Cold Minimum, what it allows you to do in the rest of your roster. It was actually Taysom Hill at Stone Cold Minimum who should have been on everyone's team. But the week before that, we did talk about Taysom Hill and the fact that it allows you to play so many studs. So I'll very much be trying to run through some projections and see what I can build around Tommy DeVito this week. But let's talk about our favorite plays. Juwan Jennings, 5K. Juwan Jennings looks like the best wide receiver in San Francisco right now, and that hurts me as somebody who's quite aggressive. Yeah, it hurts. I was pretty aggressive on Deebo Samuel this year, and Juwan Jennings is somebody I like. I've got Juwan Jennings on several dynasty teams. I thought that he could be a decent role player this year, particularly when Ricky Pearsall got shot. Now he's 5th in yards per out run, 5th in PFF receiving grade, and it feels like Brock Purdy trusts him the most because Brock Purdy is throwing contested catches to Juwan Jennings at a far higher rate than any other player on the team. Do you think that Juwan Jennings just keeps this going all season?
I absolutely see no reason why not. This is a guy that is a big body guy, but he's phenomenal with the ball in his hands. His ability in the short area has been what's blown me away this year. I think as a route runner, he's competent. He uses his size well, but every time there is a money down, every time the 49ers have got to have it, it's not Deebo they're looking at. It's not George Kittle. It is third and Juwan. He's the guy. And at £5,000, it's good value. I feel like he kind of needs to be in a lot of lineups this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that he is somebody that you could either play with CMC and hope that that game against Green Bay really goes to a high over under, or you use the leverage away if you do feel that CMC is going to be too chalky. If you want to put Achan in your captain spot or Amon-Ra St. Brown or somebody else highly projected, then Juwan Jennings makes lots of sense as a leverage play completely. I doubt anyone's going to play Debo. Debo also would be good leverage. Brian Robinson, 6K. We got to talk about Brian Robinson because he is playing the Cowboys, who are just rancid from start to finish this year. We didn't get any of the fun that we saw from Dak Prescott and CD Lamb last year when they were incredible from week 8 onwards. Instead, we got a team who were poor on defense and poor on offense. Brian Robinson's had only one finish outside the top 36 running backs. He's had over 70 total yards in 4 of the last 5 games. We know he's a little bit touchdown reliant, but this Cowboys team, they have been poor against the run all year. You go back to when the Ravens absolutely shellacked them with Derrick Henry, and it's just never really gotten better. They've allowed the third most fantasy points to running back position. They ranked 27th in DVOA against the position, and now they don't have a competent offense. It's so much harder for their defense to keep their breath and be able to stay with an offense throughout. Do you think that Brian Robinson is a better play than Austin Eckler this week?
Oh, absolutely. I think in terms of straight up, in terms of the value, in terms of everything, I think I see this game going, Washington's going to get up early and just run the ball. And to me, you want your bigger body back that's going to pound away. And that's Brian Robinson. I think he's going to see a huge amount of volume. And I think, he's priced reasonably high for that kind of second tier running back at £6,000, but it's still decent value, and I'm happy to plug him into pretty much any type of lineup. If you're going running back heavy, if you're loading up at wide receivers, I think you can still slip him in as a kind of semi-expensive running back, and you will see good volume because it is such a juicy matchup against a Cowboys defense that I think are already on their way to Cancun.
So I'm going to throw a wild card for you here. Brian Robinson at 6K or Malik Neighbors at 6K. Who do you prefer?
I think I'd lean Malik Neighbors. I'm incredibly high on Malik Neighbors this week. He was on my start of the week on the main show. I would rather approach it. I think it would depend how I'm building my lineup as to which one I would generally prefer. But yeah, if you gun to the head had to pick one, it'd be Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think upside is Malik Neighbors, floor, predictability, Brian Robinson. James Conner, also somebody who's been incredibly reliable this year, 6,400, going up against the Seahawks in that divisional matchup. And I think that there's a lot of people who are expecting to see more Trey Benson coming out of the bye. Our good friend Lewis talked about how Trey Benson was one of the best pickups and everyone should be rostering him in redraft. 100% agree. But when you look at what James Conner's been doing, over 100 total yards in 5 of the last 7, hasn't missed a game this year yet. He's never played over 13 games in a season. Can James Conner keep going against this Seattle team who've allowed the 8th most running back fantasy points?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're buying such a safe floor here. You know that the Cardinals are going to feed him. You know he's going to get good volume. You know he's going to be used in and around the goal line. You know he's going to get a couple of looks in the passing game. You're basically almost buying guaranteed volume and a really solid floor. But there is so much upside because this does have one of the higher over unders on the slate, and there is potential that this game could kick on and be a bit of a shootout.
Yeah, I love James Conner. I just think what James Conner's done, he's one of those players who people consistently look for a way to find negatives on, like, oh, James Conner's this old, James Conner's this. And, he doesn't have the longevity in Dynasty, blah, blah, blah. But James Conner this year, every game he's played, he's only finished outside of the top 20 running backs on 2 occasions, finished the top 8 running back on 3, finished the top 15 on 5. Like, James Conner just delivers, and he's only had 5 touchdowns this year. It feels like there is a higher path for him to get to, and I don't think that Seattle are a particularly good defense, despite Mike McDonald's best efforts. Let's talk budget, guys, those key enablers before we get out of here. Jatavian Sanders, 2,400. And it's kind of been an interesting path for the Panthers this year. You look at what they've gone through, going from Bryce Young to Andy Dalton, and then going back to Bryce Young. And Bryce Young looking much better than he did at any other point. Carolina have won their last 2 games. That's the first time in Bryce's career they've won back-to-back games. Jatavian Sanders has been a top 15 tight end in 4 of the last 5 games. The Chiefs really struggle against the tight end position. I think they've given up the 2nd most fantasy points to the position, 5th most fantasy points to the position. Do you think that Jatavian Sanders has enough here in this matchup to be able to get home? Or do you think Kansas City are going to stomp him?
I think Kansas City are going to stomp him, but I think that almost plays into Jatavian Sanders a little bit, because I think if we're going to get some garbage time potential, Bryce Young's going to be dropping back. And as you said, he's carving out a much bigger role. He's up to over 80% snap share. He's been top 15 for the last 5 weeks, as you said. And I just think that there is potential to get some good value. And I don't know about you, Tom, but I'm really enjoying building lineups and had some really good success over the past few weeks with that key enabler at the tight end position. It feels like it's a position where there are plenty of guys priced at rock bottom values, but you can still almost attack some decent floor within some of those guys. We've seen Will Disley in the last few weeks. I think another one to potentially mention is Luke Schoonmaker again this week, who's 2,200. If you can get the enabler in at the tight end, it allows you so much freedom to go and attack other positions.
Yeah, and in bigger DFS contests, we typically want to correlate our tight ends with our quarterbacks, because it's just an easy way to go, okay, tight end is so unpredictable. Let's say if we believe the quarterback's going to hit the ceiling, then we want to probably pair a tight end with it, because that way it takes some of the unpredictable side of it out. So if you wanted to move away from Travis Kelce in Patrick Mahomes stacks, or if you wanted to go Kelce and Jatavian Sanders, I don't think that that's a problem. We've seen over the last couple of weeks, there's been points where some of my better lineups that have finished high up have had 2 tight ends with a tight end in the flex, because you sometimes just need that salary. So very much with you on that one. I think it's worth mentioning that over the last 2 games, Bryce Young has completed 80% of his red zone passes. Compare that with before he was benched, he completed 4 of his previous 13. So that is a big positive for Jatavian Sanders, and I think that he's a good shot, as is Luke Shoemaker. Jonathan Brooks, 2,400. Now, there's a lot more projection here. This is the ceiling play. The guy like Audric Estime last week that felt like the free square, but obviously it didn't pan out for Audric Estime. Jonathan Brooks, week 12, finally potentially ready to make his debut. Do you think that he can get those kind of 7-8 points that we kind of hope for to pay off at this bare minimum almost price?
Do I think? No. At this price, is it worth the dart throw? Absolutely. This is a guy that showed at Texas exactly what he can be. I think if he'd have been healthy, he'd have potentially been a borderline first-round pick in the NFL draft. He is a phenomenal one-cut runner. He has got electric speed. They have absolutely eased him into this year. You'd like to think that he's pretty much full go. I don't think he's going to get reliable volume, because I think that the Panthers are still going to force feed Chuba Hubbard and kind of roll with that hand there. But if you're shooting for upside, why not? This is a guy that can score from anywhere on the field. Let's take a dart throw at 2,400. You always say you're looking for 8 points from these guys. That could be one play.
Yeah, and the Chiefs, they do allow the fewest running back fantasy points, but I just kind of think that if this game is kind of getting out of hand a little bit or anything like that, then Brooks has potential to just be out there and to get some touches. We know that his ACL tear was a clean one, much more closer to Breece Hall's than to the likes of J.K. Dobbins or Javonte Williams. I think that he's been recovered well enough to play for a little while, and the Panthers have slow played it. So, yeah, I think it's not one I'd get carried away on, but if I'm making 5 lineups in a contest, Jonathan Brooks is probably going in one of them. Amir Abdullah, though, potentially could be one of the chalk enablers and budget plays of the week, because Zamir White and Alexander Mattison might miss this one. Zamir White isn't that much of a miss. He's looked dreadful even when he's gotten volume over the last few weeks. Alexander Mattison has been seeing just enough high-value touches to make him worthwhile as a flex play in regular leagues and as a dart throw when the price was right in these contests. At 2,200, it feels like that you could start Amir Abdullah because he's the clear back there. He is the clear RB3. And obviously, against the Broncos, that's not a particularly easy defense to go up against. But Amir Abdullah, are you buying in at 2,200?
I think you need to approach him in your lineup with a certain mindset in terms of there is basically very little upside in Amir Abdullah. I feel like his ceiling is probably 10 points, which is great, but you then need upside at other points of your lineup. If you're just going to go safe and plug in Abdullah as your kind of, he's my enabler, I hope he gets 10 points, you're probably going to end up in that bottom cash tier, maybe even below that, and you're not going to have a great week. I think Abdullah, look, if we're seeing no Zamir White, no Alexander Mattison, we know he's going to get the goal line Qataris. We know that he's been the third down back. Yes, they could potentially mix in Dylan Labe, but look, he's not been on the field so far this year. I'm not concerned. I think that there's a reasonable floor with no massive ceiling. But whenever you're looking for these enablers, there's always generally a reason why they're priced at 2,200. And I think that there is a world where you can put him in a lineup, he can get you 10 points, and you can just load up at other positions and get that upside elsewhere.
I've got to admit, I haven't checked PFF's pass blocking grades, but I've got to imagine that Amir Abdullah is probably slightly better as an experienced NFL player than Dylan Laube is. So that should probably be something that we weigh in with the Broncos potentially bringing pressure at a high rate. And I'm absolutely sorry to correct you on this one, but Amir Abdullah had 14.1 PPR points in week 5. So, 14.1 PPR points, I'd be over the moon with that one.
Yeah, but that wasn't against the Denver Broncos, was it? And, one of the better defenses out there. I'm not sure.
It was against the Denver Broncos.
Oh, was it? And to come back to you on the pass blocking thing, Amir Abdullah so far this year has had a pass blocking grade of 63.6. It's pretty decent, small sample size. Dylan Labe has 0 pass blocking snaps. So I think it's safe to say that Abdullah is going to be in on the majority of those third downs.
There we go. Amir Abdullah, week winner on Fantasy Game Day this week. Remember that they have boosted the prize for tonight's Cleveland against the Steelers game. Go and check out our main preview on the main channel for that. We talked right at the end of that show about that game and about how I think there's some sneaky ways you can attack that because people are worried about the weather. Go and check out the entire game preview for that one, the whole weekly preview on that channel, because we talked about all these games in more detail and it will get you set up to crush. And remember, £7.50 Sunday Stars. They've boosted the cash pot in that one. There's going to be plenty of entries in there and it's going to be well worth attacking. And if you haven't signed up already, you made it 27 minutes through this video, go and do so. Code TFS23 for a free second entry. Hit the join button on our Discord over on the main channel for even more Fantasy Game Day